All right, welcome aboard, everyone. Happy Monday. We'll see what this week entails, right? Um, Apologies. I feel like every time I end up being the presenter for Echo, I'm sick. So, don't worry, we got two young boys. These things happen all the time, literally. Um, so I believe my voice should be good for the duration. But when we were discussing going over cannabis, CBD, THC, we were going to go the more clinical route and then flip the switch because there's a lot going on in the world and there's a lot going on in our country in general. But one of the many things is regulatory change. It's been on the edge of the seat for just about everybody for a good number of years now, actually. So a couple of the questions that always come in, I believe here and many other places is what does it all mean? So, since we have a little extended time today, I was going to take you on a little hot tub journey, time machine journey here to kind of go through some of the drug related regulations, medicines too, of course. And I'll try and check in with the chat here and there in case anybody's. All right, Manbury, happy Monday as well too. All right. Um, this is one of those topics where if you can't come up with a pun, well, you've already been pronounced dead. So these things happen. Disclosures, if I had one in this realm, oh boy. Um, so we'll go over some history, we'll go over some regulatory efforts of the past, perhaps future, kind of get your pulse on that. And then how does rescheduling work for anything, not just cannabis, but for anything? Like, how does that actually work? We've heard a lot recently, but how's it work? So going back really far, I'm going to try and mesh history and the regulations along the way and really try and give you only what matters along the way. The whole point of these dates, other than being extremely approximate, is that cannabis is natural. It has been around forever. When you see something like 10,000 BC, even if it's off by a few years, go with the 3,000 BC one if you need to. Been a long time. Okay. Um, Equally, we've pretty much always had our endocannabinoid system, or ECS, within our bodies, even though it has not been taught in middle school health class like every other body system. Um, Lots going on there, but I'll let your eyes wander as far as any specific info, but been around a long time. So if we were to jump towards really the beginnings of our country, hey, 250 years this year. I'm sure you guys saw the patch last night during the Super Bowl. Um, some of our founding fathers were known growers of hemp. In fact, I mentioned this in a presentation exclusively to pharmacists once, and somebody commented that they were a volunteer at Colonial Williamsburg, in case you've ever gone there for a tourist fun, vacation fun. And they said that they, on their tours, actually talk about that. I was like, wow, I talk about a comment. So there's your bar, folks. If you have a comment today, it's got to be something on that level there. So, all right. Lots of other things as far as across the pond. The history of our country has this integrated along the way. It's even been used as cash money, as tender in some states a long time ago. Um, it was in a lot of tinctures and medications. A little bit more on that. This is entirely too much information for a slide, but some people just like the extra info. But if you go about 100 years ago, like think about where we are today. We have some FDA approved cannabinoids, just a handful, barely. But about 100 years ago, we had a lot more that were utilized in medicine. Now, notice I didn't say FDA approved because, well, that wouldn't really be a thing. Um, Here you can see that it was estimated that about 6% of all manufactured drugs, medications, contained a form of cannabis. Think about that. Now, there wasn't 10,000 medications back then, so there's that. But that's an appreciable percentage. It's not 50%. It's not off the charts. And relate that in our minds to today, right? So that's the big picture along the way. And then we started some of our regulatory efforts. One of the commonly referred to movies out there in the realm of cannabis was from about 90 years ago, Reefer Madness. It was said to stimulate the anti-cannabis movement, or one of the facets of that, or at least propel it further. There's been debates. There's actually been some recent articles about that saying, yeah, that wasn't really the case. It was just a movie. Which side of the coin is correct? Good luck in today's internet. One thing we can say, though, in the factual side was that in 1937, we had the Marijuana, that's how it was actually spelled, Tax Act. You could actually see, hopefully, in the bottom right, one of the stamps that was legit from that tax act. This was where we were starting to see an overlap of financials, federal, and utilization of the product overall. So there was a tax associated with, in this case, they stated marijuana, but I usually like to use the umbrella term of cannabis overall. It's also a $5 one. And if you think about inflation and all that, that's, for one product, that'd be kind of up there today as far as prices. All right, so now fast forward to the 40s, and in the 60s, we started wrapping our heads around scientifically of the THC and CBD components. I'm not going to go too far into that today, but just planting the seed. As far as the cannabinoids, the main ones overall. Some might wonder how I go from that slide of pharmacology, kind of, sort of, to wow, am I really reading this? You don't have to read it, but this is a quote from John Ehrlichman. It was a top advisor to President Nixon. President Nixon was around the administration when we had a lot of controlled substance regulatory efforts. I'll cover those in the next couple slides here. But when you're talking specifically about cannabis, this is what was quoted by this gentleman. It's one human being. Um, but wow. As far as, when we think of law, like whenever someone's going over law, medical law, pharmacy law, you name it, it always seems pretty objective until we talk about the substance realm. Like alcohol was legal, then illegal, and then legal again. What happened there? Chemical didn't change. Could there be a lot of stigma? Could there be racism? Could there be all of these potential things within the process for laws? It's certainly potential, and here's just a quote wanted to share. So if you just jump a little bit further, jump into the 70s, join me. That's when we got our Controlled Substance Act. That's where we started having these schedules of medications, basically 1 through 5. But we didn't have that previously. And this was all supposed to start when the rest of the world was kind of jumping on board as well, too. Right along those times came this term 420. Now, if you were around for a talk kind of like this, maybe a few years back, or if you just have common knowledge, we'll just go with the presumption that everybody knows that 420 can be talking about cannabis utilization, typically combustion or smoking. Where did that come from? Like, why is that a term overall? Anybody know? Some water in the meantime. Well, when you woke up today after a long night of watching the Super Bowl, you probably didn't think, boy, I'd be talking or learning about this one today. You forgot I was up to bat. Oh, wait, there's something in the chat. I already clicked the next slide. Ooh, Katie said law enforcement code. That's one of the best guesses I think I've ever had. It's get some off the wall ones with this one, and that's okay. So what seems to be what was substantiated was that bunch of teenagers, West Coast, so out in California, used to gather outside of school, just after school. I believe it was after soccer or something like that. And they said, "Oh, well, we got to meet somewhere, so we'll meet at the Louis Pasteur statue over there." What time's good for you? About 4:20. Sure. I can't make 4 o'clock. Let's make it 4:20. Um, that's what they did. So that story or that part of a larger story was taken up by High Times, I don't know if I'd say journal, the magazine that would talk about cannabis and its utilization a lot. Once the editor of High Times got that information, it spread like wildfire. And that just became one of the terms. This, I believe, is a picture of the reunion of the Waldos. There was also a wall there, so they like called Waldos for some reason. but that's where 420 came from, supposedly. All right, so we're still in the 70s, and we had this thing basically coming to the federal level where there was a report done. Got lots of information in this slide, but basically, the administration at the time said, let's wrap our hands around this cannabis topic. You know, since we formed these controlled substance classes, should it be classified as one, three, five? What dart are we going with today? So the actual Pennsylvania governor at the time was charged with leading that effort. And the bottom line was of all this wording here, is that that report basically said, you know, that there shouldn't be prohibition with this. It should not be a CS1, AKA. The idea would be that it would be decriminalized, even though if it's not criminalized to begin with, that's kind of tricky in the wording. But basically, the report was ignored. So folks were tasked with creating the work, and then the outcome was ignored. Those that know me in the pain management realm might be thinking, isn't that what happened to the opioid work group for the CDC opioid guidelines? History always repeats itself. Interesting. More on that some other day. So the DEA itself was created a year later, 1973. It is a cabinet position, of course, for within our country. It is part of the overall Department of Justice, led by the Attorney General. It's one of many. Typically, when there's efforts in the drug realm, they are distinguished to be the healthcare supply chain and then the cartels or street chemists overall. You'll have DEA investigate, raid, whatever words that we have, and then all that data, all that information, the evidence goes to U.S. attorneys, and they go through all the cases overall. And they have other main efforts in the big picture. I'll jump past that one for today. We also had, so fast forward to late 80s. There's a couple other things from the 80s too. So, well, I'm sure some will remember the next things, but back in 88, we had the Office of National Drug Control Policy formed. The bottom line of that entity was to reduce supply and reduce demand. And here we are today with the same targets overall when it comes to substance utilization. There's some specific missions overall. This was also elevated to cabinet level in the big picture overall. In fact, the leader is typically known as the drug czar. This is the one that I was alluding to. I'm sure many folks would remember the Just Say No campaign. And of course, this is your egg. This is your, I'm sorry, this is your brain. I feel like my brain today. The egg is this is your brain, and this is your brain on drugs. We've all heard it, either while we were maturing our brains or recently, who knows? Um, there's been studies into hate of that work, and those things are just so hard to prove in a substantial way because there's just a lot of other things going on in the world as well too. So kind of wrapping up that century, I guess we'll say, of the 1900s, a couple other ideas overall, but more on the pharmacology, the PhD side. But if you jump all the way down to 1996, that's when California was the first state to legalize medical marijuana. So we ended the century with a bang there, right? Now, since then, we've had a couple other things, bigger picture overall. I'm not going to go too deep into the Cole memorandum, but the big picture was that the DEA was basically given by Congress a $1 budget for enforcement of the law of cannabis being a controlled substance class 1. And it really brings up such a basic topic. There's regulation and there's enforcement. If the left hand ain't talking to the right hand, how do we go about these things? Often people have those questions of like, well, how is it if it's illegal, then well, if it's not enforced, there's still state and local level as well too, but that was a bigger picture. I'm sure y'all recall I jumped onto the Farm Bill almost a decade ago now. We're hearing more of that in headlines. You may be hearing more of that in headlines today because a lot of legislators are um, lobbyists have their ear as far as, hey, how did that work out? What were the original intentions? The bottom line, big picture, and there'll be a takeaway for this one, is that, when a CBD product was out there, as long as it had less than 0.3% THC, then it was okay. It could be kind of like a cosmetic, I guess we'd say, which is really tricky when you think about it, because, you know, um, percentage is not necessarily like a dose. Like, how much is that? So, since we get that a lot, I figure let's go over that. So, typically, about 5 milligrams, maybe 10, would be needed of THC to cause intoxication overall. So, if you have an average 30 ml bottle of CBD extract, that is said, then it can contain about, oh boy, backwards, about 81 milligrams of THC in, overall. Well, a dose, so like two dropperfuls in this case, may only contain 0.27 milligrams of THC. So in the extract sense, you're like, hey, that probably lines up overall. Let's take a gummy, for instance, though. So a 4 gram, it's really small, little CBD gummy could contain 12 milligrams of THC and are often sold in 30 quantity containers, if not more. Well, to quote the great Will Ferrell, that escalated quickly. Because again, 12 milligrams is well over what's needed for that intoxication level, and that's just one gummy of many in a container overall. It's almost like everybody didn't read into that one. Like, oh, 0. It's less than one. That can't be that much. Oh my gosh. So things to keep in mind there. All right. We've had other presenters, I believe, in the past through here with Echo, and then also, I believe, at regional and state and even local here, presentations talk about getting, marijuana dispensary cards. What it seems to be is that it's pretty easy. Not to go into details and all that. I actually contemplated getting one myself just to make presentations a little bit more hot. And then I thought, well, yeah, kids, let's not get too wild here. But then there was one pain doc from Canada that came down and said, well, I actually have chronic pain, so I got one. And I was like, wow, you're way cooler for doing presentations. Um, but anyways, the bottom line is it's not that hard. There have been reports, hard to substantiate, where somebody could walk into a dispensary and there might be somebody there with a laptop, click away, there you go. Now, in not just dispensary really, but bigger picture, we've all seen the headlines of, as far as revenue, okay, and what states get for taxes. So if you look at some of the heavy hitters here, typically out west, as far as cannabis tax revenue, when you look at the raw numbers, they're quite impressive. When you're looking at something like $300 million, you're thinking, wow, this is quite the business, right? And that I'll definitely be sharing a handout. I checked out the chat here in the meantime. That's one of the numbers to keep in mind overall. The flip side is, it's like I try and be active in my church on their finance council. Um, their electric bill is astronomical compared to mine. Okay. So a state's budget is astronomical compared to a dispensary, or, the numbers that you're talking are just many more zeros. Okay. And that comes into play. So yeah, 300 million, but it's less than 1% of their state budget. That doesn't mean negative. That doesn't mean bad, but it's just, you got to look at the whole picture overall. Really important. All right. This is what I would challenge folks. This is about the best I can find over the last year or two, of saying what's the purpose with regulation? Okay. When you're talking about substances that are regulated, what's the purpose? Most would agree that one of, if not the purposes, is to reduce harm. Okay. So here, if you look at this is just one visualization, one reference. If you go to the extremes, that's on the right or the left, you get more action on the Y vertical axis, which is the harm to individual and society. So basically what it's saying is, if you make it completely illegal and lock it up, you're going to have harm, because people are going to find a way. Whereas the other side of the coin, if you just say, have at it and don't regulate a thing, there's going to be harm. The special sauce is somewhere in the middle, and that's where we get our circular conversations overall of like, oh, should it be decriminalized? Should it be a different controlled substance class? What's the answers there? I could poll everyone here. We'd have a lot of different answers. We'd have some consistencies as well too. But 50 people aren't going to say this is the way. This is not Mandalorian, Star Wars. Um, it's just tricky overall. But what most show is that extremes just don't work overall. We've been there before. And by the way, in case you forgot already, what about the enforcement? That's an important thing. As far as court of public opinion, there's multiple studies that are out there, or at least news articles. Those aren't studies, but that would visually and numerically explain that the court of public opinion, the majority, meaning at least over 50% of folks in our country, when surveyed and polled, multiple aspects would say, hey, there needs to be change. A lot of times it's actually, just unregulated. Um, but again, everyone completing a survey, did they read the last slide, right? Thinking about the overall picture there too. So we went from 96 was the first state that legalized medical marijuana at the time. Here's a general, most updated picture I could find about within the last month here. Um, just showing, and there's different colors. The bottom line is what you want to look at as the big picture here is that almost all states, we got like a half a dozen that haven't done anything just yet, um, have some kind of movement overall. Okay. Whether it's thumbs up or thumbs down or hands in the middle. I don't want to do the 6-7 thing. That's outdated now. Um, but there's some kind of movement overall. And when you look at the whole picture, there's a lot of green, of course, but it's the vast majority of our country geographically, and when you look at populations as well too, where there's been opinions and legislation out there, of course. So, where does that leave us for the eventual reclassification of cannabis? Currently, of course, it is a C1, CS1, controlled substance class 1. There's a couple decent amount of factors that go into classification criteria. The big picture would be no generally accepted medical use. It's a tricky one these days. And then high addiction or abuse potential. We get more and more info all the time, but that's where it's currently placed. And I've learned to be intelligent enough of not putting the word cannabis on here because who knows? It could be changed tonight. How interesting would it be if we had this meeting, this presentation, and then tonight things changed? Good golly. There's other things on here though. Not to go on a tangent on say like opioids or stimulants or things like that, but meth is on here. It's a C2. The last time I was dispensed in a pharmacy other than the 7th of never was like one guy. If I have an audience of 500, there's always one guy. It's like, yeah, I have it in my pharmacy. And that's true. But I said 500. So the other 499 have never seen it in their pharmacy. So, it depends on the source overall. All the illegal stuff, that's not what we're talking about here. That's a different supply chain overall. You see, tramadol is a C4. Well, its buddies are hanging out typically as a C2 as far as other prescription opioids, except buprenorphine, that's a C3, and a couple others here as well too. It's also a sign of the times. All right, so this is not looking to be polarized or political or anything, but when you look at the plant, here they always show the leaf, but it's really about the buds. But the plant is not the same thing. It's so much more than the FDA approved products. The FDA approved products are just that products, just that medication, just that chemical, dronabinol or THC in this case. There's a lot more in the plant, good or bad, but there's a lot more overall. I only put this slide in here in case, like last night, if people were bored with the Super Bowl, if they made a regulatory update, but they didn't, so I'll move on. How do things get reclassified in our country? There's generally speaking two ways with a little asterisk on the last one. Congress could pass legislation today, and it would change or modify or update the Controlled Substance Act. That is always a possibility. Conversely, it's always said the Attorney General, so think within the Department of Justice leading that, but there would be a petition involving the Attorney General, and then it would go to HHS, FDA is part of that. Comes back, Attorney General's got to put it all together and get that done. A little bit more convoluted overall, but that's generally how things are usually going anymore. Sorry. Then on top of that, if the rescheduling is deemed economically significant, how in the world cannabis rescheduling wouldn't be? The White House, Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, and Office of Management and Budget also reviews it. Okay, so the current administration would review as well too. That's when you get your executive branch involvement. But generally speaking, there's the slightly longer, more convoluted methodology, or Congress passes legislation. We have yet to see either when it comes to cannabis since the beginning of the Controlled Substance Act, actually. It's still a C1. So often, folks, hopefully some of the questions you would have walking into this would be, okay, so, excuse me. Last year, I believe it was the FDA, HHS said, hey, we recommend folks, we recommend that we make this a C3. DEA, Attorney General kind of got on board with that. It was a lot of news, a lot of hype, and then that was that. The previous administration was on board with it. The current administration made an executive order, one of like 240 some of them, on December 18th, 2025, saying that cannabis needs to become a CS3. If you were to go back a slide, executive branch only gets involved at that latter part there. Congress has to do that, or the extra process overall. It cannot be an executive order. But what are the things that would come from cannabis becoming a C3? I hope you didn't read through all of this because it's just a lot of specifics here in the pharmacy realm. I probably should have said that in the beginning. So one of the many things that are out there in lots of our paperwork when it comes to pharmacy law is this, dispensing without a prescription. So as it reads, a controlled substance listed in 2 through 5, so not C1s, but 2 through 5, which is not a prescription drug as determined under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, may be dispensed by a pharmacist without a prescription to a purchaser at retail, provided that all these things are met. You got to be an adult, ID, limits on how much of the product. You can't mail order this. You got to keep a paper-bound book, go figure. And the dispensing has to be by a pharmacist. So relatively low-hanging fruit, but if you think about it, if it's a C3, all of a sudden now it's not a C1. It's not a prescription drug unless it's those FDA approved ones. So all the other stuff that we see everywhere. What this basically translates to is that pharmacies presumably would be able to compound things and make these products and provide these products overall without a prescription in the general picture. This is one that even folks, Tom's here, myself, a few others, within the pharmacy realm, this isn't something that's known by everybody automatically. It's one of those tiny little laws in the background, hardly ever comes up. Yet here we are um, in the big picture. So that it might not be a profound thing, but it's something to keep on the radar. Otherwise, what's the implications here for if cannabis becomes a C3? How are we doing on time? We're good. Tax deductions comes up. So as far as the financials, it would still be a controlled substance. So the banking side of things doesn't necessarily change. One of the big consternations for dispensaries these days is like, oh, well, it's not legal on the federal level. So the interstate commerce, it's got to be cash. You got to be hordes of cash in these places need to be locked up. Yada yada yada. That doesn't really change in this case because it's really just tax deductions overall. It's not the business finances along the way. But the state legal cannabis businesses, so went through all the, getting that level, could claim the standard federal tax deductions along the way. There's a specific section, sorry, of the IRS section 280E would no longer apply We don't need to memorize that number, folks. The expected savings for a typical dispensary would be about $250,000. So there's that. Um, that also unlocks about $2 billion a year after tax cash flow, you name it, along the way. So there's very large tax situations there. A visual way of looking at that is from this reference overall, just showing that, okay, I guess we'll call it purple, magenta, the purple looking, if you take even, we'll go with Pennsylvania, it's at the top, and it's a close neighbor. You got, current net profit, what they're pulling in after all, the lights are paid for and all that, would be 495K. So 500,000. Well, that would almost double if that 280 tax burden wasn't there. Perhaps that's why on December 19th, a handful of cannabis company stocks went after that executive order was announced, which again has nothing to do with the reality of free scheduling in the big picture, but stock market works other ways. So these are just some visuals where when you see the orange, that's where there would be additional cash money along the way. Big picture, though, since got to talk about the money side of things, there is I always like to quote Dr. Nora Volkow. She included this within a graduation address. I forget which university. It ended up being in her journal as well. But the bottom line is that legal drugs offer a sobering perspective. They account for the greatest burden of disease associated with drugs, not because they're more dangerous than illegal drugs. The pharmacology doesn't work out; they're just not, but because their legal status allows for more widespread exposure. So that last slide and the one before it talked about all the increased money, but it didn't talk about increased costs that will be inevitable along the way as well too. And not just the patient care and health side, the actual costs that will associated with states and our country. One of the biggest things, of course, is perception. There's gullible folks on this planet, and there's stubborn folks, and there's intelligent folks, and there's a mixture of folks. But what this is basically showing is what's tried and true is that when the perception of risk is increased, the actual utilization is decreased. This is a specific population. It's probably incorrect to extrapolate to everyone, but we can take it for what it's worth at least. And then when perceived risk is down, utilization goes up. So bottom line, we have to educate folks as to, what are the risks overall. Oh, apparently I put my little pain guy thing here at the end. Hey, that QR code works. And you can always check out I have resources and some headlines, but the resources tab has some guidelines and some other information in this realm and beyond, of course. Pain, addiction, diversion, and beyond with painguy.us. If you guys ever actually want to message me as well too, email works, don't get me wrong. But if you message me on the website, it actually like buzzes my phone. So give me more than 3 seconds to reply, but that would be that overall. All right, that was a lot of talking and I barely have a voice, but kind of questions or thoughts do you guys have? Fully knowing I probably should have disposed here that, no, I don't know how you identify an expert in this realm, but you're not necessarily looking at one. But it's good to bring up these topics to discuss overall. So what kind of thoughts and questions do you have, perhaps for the group or yours truly?
Great presentation, Mark. Thank you, and I hope you feel better. Is there ever been talk about, we have the Board of Pharmacy for controlled medications. Is there any possibility of that for folks that are getting medical marijuana?
There's always a possibility, and that is something that has been looked at. Numerous, whatever you want to call it, states as well too. There's a lot with that. So first off, dispensaries will have like a maximum that somebody could receive each day. What they don't have is a pot PDMP. And I go with a P because it starts with that. So somebody could do, the slang term is looping, can go from dispensary to dispensary getting the maximum. That is not to create hysteria and say that's what people are doing. It's just saying it's possible. And to think that no one ever did it is kind of facetious as well. But not everyone, right? So tracking would be wonderful. What is the purpose of the PDMPs, CSMPs, Board of Pharmacy reports, all the different terminology, CSAP, you name it? It's to give in the healthcare sense, give a clinician a picture of what's going on for a patient. There was a time when methadone wouldn't be reported to that. If there is one thing I need to know for a patient in pain or a patient with substance use disorder, utilization of methadone comes to mind pretty quick.
Yeah.
There's still times it's not in there, sadly,
Oh.
but there was a time when it happened more frequently. If somebody is utilizing any type of cannabis, cannabinoid, you name it, it particularly THC based products or whatever, why in the world would that not help a clinician, right?
Mhm.
That being said, what are the mechanics? I remember a time a little bit over a decade, probably about 15 years ago in our state, before naloxone had a standing order. Examples all over the place. There was a board of pharmacy protocol for pharmacists to provide it without a prescription. And for some reason, we were noticing that pharmacists weren't doing that. Pharmacies weren't doing that as well. We were like, what's going on here? So I called a whole bunch of my peeps, and they're like, well, the protocol says that you got to report it to the PDMP, the CSMP, and it's not a control, so the computer doesn't report it. My hands are tied. The idea of reporting it was good. It was going to show, hey, we're helping save lives here. Didn't, if a
Mm.
senator picked up a phone and just gave one of us a call, good God, anybody in this call in this room, like we'd be like, no, it's not a control. It's not going to get reported. The little pharmacies figured it out. Big ones that have 10,000 stores can't change their system. It's just how it is. Um, but caveat to reporting, cannabis style dispensing, but products in there would be all of a sudden we'd have all these funky names in there too. It might dilute the info. Like, what's it gonna? It would, you know,
That's a
double
really good
caveat to
point.
that would be like, can you just say that they have a product? Like, is that enough? Is it
Yeah.
CBD, THC? Is it whatever? You come into labeling accuracy concerns. The labeling accuracy has increased over the last few years, last decade, really. Still not where it needs to be. Um, some of the larger companies with more capital are putting the due diligence in, but the rest of the gang in the market aren't. So or would a PDMP report look more like like we see with a drug overdose, opioid overdose, where it just says it's there? It's a possibility. Um, it takes collaboration well beyond healthcare, and we haven't seen that level just yet. Potentially because of everything I just yapped through of the okay, we're gonna do that. Oh, all of those things. Like you got to have the
Mhm.
right people at the table, and even then you know. And then there's privacy things too. Well, it's not a prescription, so why isn't it a prescription drug monitor? There's just a lot. I wish
Yeah.
there was easy answers there. So
It's such a great point that it's such a unregulated market. How would you even go about accurately listing it in a database? That's a really good point.
it's I don't want to say it's careful what we wish for because I have my wishes too. Just simply knowing something that starts a conversation that what more do we need and what can we rely upon?
Yeah.
But it's there's just a lot. So
Yeah. Thank you, Mark.
no problem. You thought you were asking an easy one, and all of a sudden it had all the
My bad.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, see if we have some other questions.